one of the things we're trying to do at LBS is to say, we're an international school in Britain. We're not a British school in Britain, we're an international school in Britain, and we're in probably the most cosmopolitan city in the world, and we really celebrate that. But we don't want to lose the good things about being British, and one of those is the ability to be serious without being solemn. And so that was why this picture was from, several years ago of me. Those are my 3 current sort of formal affiliations. I'm still an emeritus professor here, and when I'm in London, I use LBS as my base. I'm chairman of which is the UK's main consumer organisation. I'll talk a bit about that later. And I have a visiting fellowship at the Reuters Institute in Oxford to work on the future of public service broadcasting, and I'll talk a bit about that. So I'm now switching to my script. LBS has been a huge part of my life. I was an MBA student from 71 to 73. I joined the faculty in 1976. It hasn't been a relaxing place to work, but it's certainly been a very interesting place to work, and I'm hugely proud of what we've collectively achieved. The school was conceived and born in early 1960s Britain. I was going to say most of you, probably all of you, are too young to remember, but even for those of us who were there, this was a world that seems very far away today. Teenagers had just been invented. Sex and drugs hadn't quite been invented. Rock and roll was just taking off. That's sort of the time we're talking about, early 60s. We had militant unions, pretty hopeless British management, highly gendered workplaces, and a rather illiberal society. And in 1963, the Franks Report on Improving British Industry included a recommendation to set up 2 world-class graduate business schools, one in the north, one in the south. The north was straightforward. Manchester said, yes, please. The south was more difficult. They first went to our most ancient university. Oxford defenestrated them with Latin imprecations for suggesting that they should pollute their name by setting up a trade school. So that didn't get them very far. They then went to our second most ancient university, and they were more politely shown the door. They then came to London as their third choice, and London said yes, provided it could nominate 2 people to sit on the governing body to make sure that their sort of reputation wasn't compromised too much. As you know, we are now listed among the top 100 universities in the world in our own right, and in the research assessment exercise, we are easily the #1 institute of higher education in the UK in terms of peer-reviewed research performance. As a sign of the times, the Trades Union Congress was also given a place on our governing body, which I don't know if that's still in the statutes, but certainly we don't have someone from the TUC on the governing body now. The next step was to appoint a chairman, Lord Plowden, a former Treasury civil servant, and the mission was to educate and equip British managers to run British businesses more effectively. We weren't LBS, we were the London Graduate School of Business Studies. No normal person can remember all those words in the right order, so in the 1970s we became a London Business School, which works just fine. The school hired a temporary office in Charing Cross, and its first principal, Arthur Earle, who was running Hoover UK. The dean was called the principal at that time in a sort of Oxbridge style. They then hired the first senior professors. Some of you may recognize this picture, which hangs in the boardroom S215. It was very high on quality, but as you can see, it wasn't quite so strong on diversity. I'm happy to say that 2 of the founding fathers are still with us as emeritus professors, and that is Harold Rose and Jim Ball. The rest are elsewhere and in some cases not alive anymore. The first MBAs arrived in 1966 and they graduated in 1968. They were almost all British, and if you look closely, see if you can spot the woman. Okay, they let a woman in, very advanced. The degree wasn't actually called an MBA. It was an MSc because London University thought an MBA might be a bit iffy. And also because, so it's a Master of Science degree. My MBA from here is actually a Master of Science. And that's again a sign of the times. The assumption was that even if management wasn't yet a science, it soon would be, and part of the school's mission was to sort of make it a science. So people, I think, had far more faith in the ability of sort of quantitative analysis to make strategic decisions and so on. The Americans tried to do it in Vietnam as well, and that didn't work very well either. The program portfolio grew with the first executive courses in '66 and a second master's program, the Sloan, which was launched by Charles Handy in 1968. The man on the left is the great Alfred P Sloan, who is essentially the creator of General Motors. This is old, good General Motors when it was enormously successful. His foundation funded the Sloan programs. The business school at MIT, his alma mater, is the Sloan School, and he funded the Sloan program, one-year Sloan program at MIT, then at Stanford, and then Charles got him to fund the European one here. By 1970, the Sussex Place campus was ready, which gave us an iconic building, proper lecture theatres, much more capacity, and a great location. So we always say, okay, the teaching may be crap, but the food and the location, okay, are really, really good, and as long as you have happy customers. And the rest is history. Now, being a marketing person, I'm sort of interested in brands. What about the brand? Well, this is how the logo has evolved. The current version looks clean and uncluttered. It says London Business School, and it emphasises London. So London is bigger than business and school, and it gradually dawned on us that London is not a cheap place to be, but it's a massive competitive advantage. So I think we're now talking about the London advantage in a way we didn't even 10 years ago. The web address has also evolved. Started off as lbs.london.ac.uk, and because we were a global school, we decided what we really wanted was lbs.edu. Unfortunately, that was already occupied by the Lutheran Brethren Seminary, and I imagine only very large amounts of money would have taken it off them. So we then went for london.edu as a sort of second choice, and london.edu is just a web address to die for. London University, and I've had the pleasure of sitting on the Senate of London University, is a very sleepy organisation. So it would have taken them 30 years to realise that london.edu is something the university should be. But anyhow, we're sitting on it now, and we're not about to shift. Obviously, what matters with brands isn't just the logo and so on. What matters is the reputation behind the logo. Brands are crucial in our market, and they take a very long time to build. The most ancient British universities, Oxford was founded in the 12th century. Bologna is older than that. Harvard is 1636. I think Harvard Business School's 1912 or something like that. University College London is 1826. MIT is 1861. Okay, so it actually takes a very, very long time to build. Actually takes quite a long time to destroy an academic brand. Brands are hugely important in our business. If someone says, I've got an MBA, the first, you might be too polite to ask, but the question which comes to your mind is, okay, where did you do your MBA? So we're really in the long-term reputation business. We're all stewards of this institution, which will be here after us. So yes, that's the london.edu. So when it comes to reputation, it is fairly remarkable that in just 50 years we've managed to create a brand with all of these accolades. And it's not just us saying it, it's other people saying it. So we're immensely proud of that, and I'm sure all of you are as well. Well, that's the end of my WAC presentation. So I'm now going to move on to the second one. I'm not going to take Q&A now. I hope you're all going to be willing to ask me questions at the end. But I'll move on to the second, rather longer presentation, which is about London Business School's impact on, quotes, marketing. And that immediately raises the question, how do academic institutions actually impact the real world? And I've sort of split it into these two headings. One set of things which are relatively direct and one which are relatively indirect. Obviously teaching, particularly exec ed, is relatively direct. Faculty consulting is very direct. Writing for practitioners is closer. Okay, so if we publish in Harvard Business Review, that is genuinely read by practitioners. There are a lot of so-called bridge journals, which California Management Review claims to be aimed at both, but is mostly, I think, read by academics. But writing for practitioners. And then you've got the much more indirect impact of academic research. Julian Birkinshaw and I have written a paper which I think is going to get published, actually on which kinds of academic research are more likely to make a managerial impact in the sense of being referred to when someone is writing for practitioners. So we have that sort of indirect measure of, and interestingly, the main finding is that review papers, which summarize a whole field, are very likely to be referred to by people writing for practitioners. And the other type, which is quite likely to be, is empirical papers which use data but don't start off with theory. Okay, because the usual respectable thing is you start off with a bit of theory and hypotheses and so on, and you test them. Those are a bit less likely to be interesting, and then methods papers are much less likely to be. So there's this issue of how do you get ideas from academic research to the real world is a sort of tricky and messy topic, but one we've actually done a little bit of work on. And then the two which I've put underneath are even more indirect in that management and good citizenship within the school enables the school to do other things. And then there's also professional service, which is like, reviewing academic papers for the academy and so on. So it's quite a sort of messy situation, and that's completely generic. I'm going to talk about three sets of things within marketing. The best known marketing academic we've ever had is my mentor and PhD supervisor, Andrew Arenberg, who worked on consumer behavior, advertising and research methods, and a few other things. Andrew and I then did work on television viewing behavior, and that's got us, particularly myself, then involved in broadcasting policy, I'll talk a bit about. And then Tim Ambler, I'll also talk about. Now, Tim is someone who's a very senior person in the booze business. He actually waylaid me half an hour ago. He happens to be in the school on his way to something and persuaded me to have a glass of champagne I possibly shouldn't have done, but that's you'll pick up about Tim a little bit later. So starting off with Andrew, that's what Andrew looked like as a youngish man, and a lot of the greatest academics are sort of seriously difficult and unreasonable people who take things to extremes. Andrew was one of those. Andrew genuinely believed that the world is a better place if resources are allocated essentially 99% Andrew, 1% everybody else. And there used to be a New Yorker's sort of view of the world, which had Midtown Manhattan very big in the foreground. And then as you got further away, you got a few things on the horizon. There's the Eiffel Tower and so on. But, and all academics, we're all a bit like that about our research. Andrew was sort of fairly extreme, very, very brilliant. David Ogilvy, who was a great advertising man who founded Ogilvy and Mather, and he was a great tall, sort of rather aristocratic Scot. And his sort of motto about setting up an agency in New York is think Jewish, talk British. Okay, so he was a clever man. And he said, Andrew, one of the best brains in marketing. So one of the things Andrew looked at using consumer panel data, okay, this is where you've got the same people's buying measured over time. So you can see, the people who buy a brand this week, what do they do next time they shop, and when do they next shop, and so on. And so that was the core of his consumer behavior work. And there's a question of, if you're a very big brand, then you probably try and sell to everyone. But if you're a small brand, should you try and, quotes, go niche? Okay, in other words, say we're going to go for sort of high loyalty within a small number of people. And large numbers of marketing people still believe that, that's something which you can do, that you have a genuine choice to make. And so this hypothetical example would be that, you might have a market with panel data in which 32% of people or households had bought that brand, and the average number of purchases was that. So that would be a very sort of high penetration, low frequency, giving it a market share of 14. And then there's another brand which is more focused in its purchasing, but the average number of purchases in the year among those who bought it at all, and that gives you the same size. And the thing about that is it never happens, right? And this is very hard for a lot of people to believe. So one of the things Andrew did is Unilever would bring him in every 3 years, and there would be another batch of 12-year-old brand managers who didn't know this, and then they would do Andrew to them to sort of, potty train them that, don't do that. It's just not going to work to go niche. People did find this quite difficult. What you actually get, and this is just an example, this is US toothpastes 20 years ago or something. The actual pattern you get is, first of all, you get very, very large differences in share, and almost all of that is accounted for by the percentage of households buying in a given time period. And it all gets a little bit sort of statistical and difficult because it's the market shares in a steady market are sort of constant if you look at a week or if you look at a year. The penetration figures are much, much higher for the year. So in a week, for Crest, 5% of people might buy Crest, but it sort of builds up over time. But then, even within quite a long period, and this is probably quarterly, the average purchase frequency hardly varies among those who bought at all. Insofar as it does vary, and this is something you must all write down because you will be able to astonish your friends with this piece of jargon I'm going to give you. If there is a trend, it's a negative trend like that, okay? That the smaller brands have much lower penetrations, and then on average, slightly lower purchase frequency. And so they suffer from, write this down, McPhee's law of double jeopardy. Impress your friends, McPhee's law of double jeopardy, which is the small brands get the worst of both worlds. Don't let your friends ask you to explain it because, and that's been found again and again and again. And it really is different. It's not just that it's factually different, it's kind of morally different from what marketers tend to believe, because in marketing, the questions in marketing are always the same, and they are embarrassingly obvious. It's sort of, who would buy this? Why would they buy it? How much would they buy? How many of them are there? What would they pay? Those are the questions, and where would they find it? How would they hear about it? It's always the same questions, but the answers are totally context-specific. And being a marketing professor is sort of a contradiction in terms, because marketing is all about it depends. And professors like, can we generalize, what's true in general? So, I mean, it's like, being a graduate business school, all right, why Oxford had a problem. So the fact that we're sitting in this sort of in-between world where, we really are academics, but the things we work on, the real-world issues, you get that sort of in marketing academia as well. To give you an example of the application, this is an alumnus who runs a local newspaper business in South Africa. And they got involved with the Arenberg research, and they used this for selling advertising to retailers in South Africa. This is very, very sort of down-to-earth stuff. And they were able to, do that kind of analysis, the toothpaste time of analysis, to show that customers weren't as loyal as people assumed. And therefore, the big retailers who went to the more expensive regional newspapers, because they thought that they were going to sell to the most frequent buyers, okay, the high value customers, the Arenbergian analysis was able to show something a bit complementary to what I showed with the toothpaste, which is that actually in any period longer than a week or so, the people who buy your brand, okay, are mostly buying other brands. Okay, in other words, what you've got is not a pattern of brand loyalty leading to a major switch. Okay, brand A, brand A, brand A, something big happens, and then you go to brand C, which is what people used to believe. It's that what you've got is we all have a portfolio of brands which we buy from, and what you've got is multi-brand repeat buying, in which you have some favorite brands, some less favorite brands. You have heavy buyers and light buyers, and it all gets a bit sort of statistical, but it's not that people are sort of switching brands, switching with a capital S. That also has implications for the way advertising works in these markets. Okay, that advertising is not sort of strongly persuasive, like St. Paul on the road to Damascus, and someone goes through a massive change in which they switch from being loyal to brand A to loyal to brand G kind of thing. It ain't like that. And Caxton were able to build a very, very profitable business simply by showing the numbers and saying, you should be spending 30% of your money with us because that will reach more people, and it's reach that matters. What advertisers want is reach, okay? And particularly in a very weakly segmented medium like TV, where if you look at the cost per thousand viewers for advertising on different channels, the ones with the highest cost per thousand viewers are the biggest. It's Channel 4 and ITV, okay, as opposed to, say, print media, which are more segmented, where an FT reader is worth much more than a tabloid reader because it's highly segmented. Okay, so a lot of this type of analysis you can apply in media as well. Those are the researchers at the Arenberg Bass Institute at the University of South Australia. So if you're looking for impact, there is a large research institute in Australia which is called Arenberg Bass because Frank Bass was an American marketing academic. I think it's fair to say that close to 100% of their work is actually in the spirit of Arenberg, not Bass. So in practice, it's the Arenberg Institute. And it's doing very well. It's funded by industry in the US, Asia Pacific, and Europe, and 35 researchers or something. So that's Arenberg. Oh, yes, Simply Better came out of that. When Andrew presented to marketers, you could essentially segment them by their intelligence level because he was very hard to understand. He also had a wonderful Middle-European accent as well, so he was straight out of central casting and, expensive suit, Middle-European accent, terrific. The really stupid ones literally had no idea what he was talking about. The more intelligent ones understood what he was saying, but they just knew from their experience he was wrong. And the bright ones wanted to commit suicide because they thought he's saying this is all random numbers and there's nothing you can do. Now, he wasn't quite saying that, but what he wasn't so strong at is sort of how do I get to be Crest with a high market share? And that's still the sort of slightly dirty secret of the Arenberg Institute, so that they've written a very successful book called How Brands Grow, but it's not exactly, I mean, it's debatable. I'm sort of really a disciple of Andrew's, and so this book, Simply Better, which I wrote with a very bright, large Irish PhD student, or after he graduated and went to get a chair at IMD, Sean Meehan, he's as Irish as he sounds. This is essentially a marriage between Arenberg, saying Arenberg is right, but don't commit suicide, and then the great Peter Drucker, who's really the father of management and marketing, who came up with the first thing we teach in Marketing 101, which is the marketing concept, which says that in the long run, firms succeed by profitably meeting their customers' needs better than the competition. And he didn't actually prove it was true, Drucker, but it is true. It was in later research showed it was true. He didn't say that much about how to do it. And I think in Simply Better, which came out in 2004, what we did is we said, no, Arenberg is right, and it's to do with what Drucker was talking about, which is that you need to focus on the generic category benefits. The main reason why someone is buying the category, rather than getting too worried about unique selling propositions. If you look at the FT rankings for, say, MBA programs, what you get at the top 5 and what you get at numbers 20 through 25 is pretty similar, but it's simply better at the top 5. And then we have a few of us have things a bit different. Okay, as it happens, we have London, which is unique. Okay, so if you have something which is significant and genuinely valuable, and it's unique, of course you use it and you talk about it, but it's not the core. Okay, there are other schools you can go to in London. You don't have to pay our fees and, come here. Okay, but if we have London as well as being sort of in the same sort of space as Stanford and Wharton and Harvard, broadly, okay, and that's true really in all markets. And it was a little bit heretical, but it won the American Marketing Association Book of the Year prize, and it was the first time anyone outside the US had won that. So we were very proud of that, and a lot of that is actually built on Arenberg. This is our 2011 book, which is a bit more executional. So you see the small print: winning and keeping customers by delivering what matters most. And then this one is long-term growth through customer focus and innovation. Every company talks about the customer is king and all of that, but they don't do it. And so we're talking a lot about the organizational reasons. RTV viewers, anyone recognize any of the people in the picture? So Gogglebox. Gogglebox actually did partly come out of some research I was involved in, which came out of some other research that Mark Ritson did with a little bit of input from me, in which we videoed TV audiences. We have a picture-on-picture so we can see what they're watching when we analyze it. And then originally a master's student at Sussex University came to me for advice, and I persuaded her to sort of replicate it. And she's just about survived, with a business, because it's very expensive research to do. Channel 4 were in the consortium. One of these two is her hairdresser, I forget which, okay, in Brighton. So there is a connection, but Channel 4, of course, this is kind of pure entertainment, and Gogglebox. So the thing which we did, and Andrew did it with other colleagues before I ever sort of appeared, was a little bit similar to the buyer behavior work, but on the repeat viewing of TV programs. My PhD title is Mass Attitudes and Routine Choice Behavior, and it looked at both. It looked at panel type data, repeat buying and repeat viewing, but also the attitudes people have towards programs and so on. We get some very, very regular patterns. And we wrote a number of papers. This is Andrew later than the earlier picture of him. And we summarised a lot of these papers in this book, which came out in 1988 and has never been out of print. It's an academic book, so it doesn't sell in enormous numbers, but it's never been out of print. And I continue to work in the media area, mainly on TV. We also had a thing called the Future Media Research Programme, which we launched in 1995 and ran until about 2003, again doing very sort of applied stuff. But I'll come back to the TV stuff a bit later. The man who gave me a glass of champagne just before kickoff, Tim, I think if you look at the picture of Tim, that gives you quite a good impression of what the man is like. He's very, very bright, Oxford mathematician, then did national service, trying to avoid being blown up by Malayan guerrillas, communist guerrillas, then trained as an accountant, did a one-year master's at MIT and loved it, but decided he couldn't afford to be an academic. So he went back into the booze business, discovered marketing, and was a very, very talented marketer. Smirnoff, a rather naughty brand. Vodka consists of ethyl alcohol, C2H5OH, which is a commodity, water H2O, which is a commodity, trade marketing, selling to the retailers, which isn't quite a commodity, but there's sort of quite a few booze companies that can do it, and the rest is branding. Okay, so this is one of the categories in which pure marketing comes into its own. Someone created Grey Goose from scratch and then sold it 8 years later for, I don't know, $3, $4, $5 billion, the clever Canadian. Okay, so this is, you know that sort of with beverages, under blind taste conditions, you know, people can hardly taste the difference between coffee and red wine at the same temperature. I mean, it's the, you know, we're very, very inefficient at doing that under, so we're using these other cues, and brand and packaging and so on, hugely important. Now, this was obviously a massive campaign for Smirnoff. It did also lead to a whole sort of species of joke, quite unsuitable for this audience today, I'm afraid. You know, when people start making up dirty jokes based on you know, then you know you're getting a result. All right, you're getting very, very high awareness and engagement, which is what they got. And bear in mind, you know, before that, you know, I mean, girls asked for baby sham. If you know, you have to look in the history books. Baby sham is okay. So this is quite a big change. Tim invented Baileys on the back of an envelope. Now, because he's a sort of natural anarchist, he had to have, you know, some more sort of sensible people to work with, one of whom was called George Bull, who subsequently became, I think, chief executive and then chairman of Diageo. And George would sort of act as an intermediary between Tim and the normal people kind of thing. But, you know, you have to have this level of creativity in marketing. You then have to channel it. And quite astonishingly, I think Tim probably has more citations than any other member of the marketing group. Okay, having come in, he's the only, certainly the only, I think he's the only senior manager who's ever joined the full-time faculty of London Business School. And I was area chair when we hired him, and it was, I mean, the more sort of traditional academics were very, very hostile to this. He was given the title Grand Met Senior Research Fellow, and Senior Research Fellow is a very, very academic title. This is someone who's supervised, you know, 20 PhD students, not just a couple kind of thing. And Tim initially thought he'd enjoy teaching, and sort of he did a bit. But the trouble is, Tim assumes so much knowledge and then has great fun demolishing it. So, for instance, he thinks it is your duty as a marketer, if you see an economist, you must kick them. It's a matter of principle. Okay. Now, until you know quite a lot about marketing and economics, you know, that seems a rather sort of strange behaviour. And so his teaching, you know, wasn't that great because his iconoclasm, for iconoclasm you have to have icons, and the kids simply didn't know enough. But he then was very, very successful as an academic researcher. His paper with a postdoc on what have we really learned about how advertising works has nearly 1,000 citations. All right. Now, there are certainly associate professors at London Business School, probably full professors, who don't have a total of 1,000 citations, and that was just one paper, which he did. He also came up with these, several books, and there's one other as well, actually. This is, I think, the best primer on marketing I've ever seen. And very typically, it's called Marketing from Advertising to Zen. Right? So you start off with advertising, which everyone immediately associates with marketing. You end up with Zen on the basis that marketing is, in fact, a Zen topic, because everything is true in marketing, and so is the opposite. People price too high, people price too low. And obviously then the wisdom comes saying, well, in this situation, should we be pricing higher or lower? So this, if you look at, say, Kotler or any of the sort of standard texts, they're hugely structured. And the implication is, if you read this book and do what it says, you will do great marketing. Well, it isn't like that. So he's not made it linear in that sense. It's a series of things in alphabetical order. So he's got, one of them, he's got what he calls the chi curve. The chi curve, which is where you've got two lines and one goes down and one goes up. And his illustration of that, which is very classic Ambler, is it's to do with one line is the percentage of the opposite sex who find you attractive, which goes down with age. And you can probably guess what the other one is. Okay, and they sort of cross at about sort of 40 or something. So that's sort of typical Ambler. And again, sort of Ambler, he's quite a sort of round gentleman. And when I introduced him as Grand Met Senior Research, I always used to tell the audience the Grand refers to Metropolitan, not Fellow. But he came in beaming one morning from the tube. He said, "You've been on this very, very crowded tube," and he was standing strap hanging, and a very pretty girl smiled at him, and he thought, "Still got it." And then she offered her seat. And so, he's very, very funny. Doing business in China, he was joint managing director of IDV, which was the sort of the spirits part of what is now Diageo, was then Grand Met, the biggest booze company on the planet, all right, in terms of certainly profit. And therefore, he had done quite a lot of business in China and Greater China. And he said China is going to be very big, sort of before most people had realized. They've done 3 editions of this. They've got one more. They brought in, I think, a third author. Our new joint venture with the Chinese Business School, through the dean, talking to their dean, the expectation is that the 4th one is going to bring in an associate professor from that school, who's going to be, the 4th author on the 4th edition. So, very, very, he kept on being ahead of his time. And then this one, which is probably his highest impact thing, Marketing and the Bottom Line, he was trained as an accountant. And he's sort of very interested in this question of marketing metrics. Okay, that one of the issues that we have in business, you've got the chief executive, and then usually the second most powerful person is the CFO, the chief finance officer. And when the chief executive asks the CFO a question, then you'll get a sort of reasonably straight answer which can be defended with numbers and so on. Now that's because actually, truth to tell, finance is kind of easier. There are sort of right answers. If you ask the CMO, the chief marketing officer, a question, then you get all this sort of stuff about positioning, and it all gets a bit sort of flaky and so on, so not highly trusted. And as we move more towards organizations with a balanced scorecard, we have to find ways of measuring the way that customers are thinking about us, how in their perceptions we compare against the competition and so on. And we should do that regularly in just the same way as we have the management accounting. And so we have things like Net Promoter Score and so on, which is a very powerful measure of customer satisfaction, but particularly customer dissatisfaction. And those should be just part of the same management pack. And so the book on marketing and the bottom line and those metrics is Tim's book. And that sort of became a standard thing and big in the US and so on. So those are the sorts of measures that he looks at. And we then got an interesting question. We did a small project together on this, which is, so how many of these should you tell the shareholders? Company chairmen get very defensive about this, and they say, oh, well, people will misunderstand. What they really mean is, supposing I publish our figures on these things this year, and then one of them goes a bit bad next year, I'm going to have to defend myself with the institutional investors. Okay, so they don't like that. So they're really, I think, protecting themselves. And they also talk about confidentiality and so on. Most of the competition are usually collecting the same, going to the same syndicated market research companies anyway. So they've probably got this, but you're keeping the shareholders in the dark. And if you're trying to justify long-term brand investment, then we would argue you should go as far as you can in actually including this in the annual report, possibly in the director's report, not in P&L. Now that raises one other. You may recognize some of those people. Again, this was several years ago. And Alison was research assistant, and then it was the other four of us. The Institute of Chartered Accountants in England and Wales went to Andrew in 88, I think. Brand equity was a term that had been invented by some advertising men in New York. And they thought this was a very clever way of sort of addressing the short-termism of finance people, because equity is a good sort of finance-sounding word. And this will sort of, we can encourage people to keep investing in advertising, because what they're doing is they're building an asset, which is true. But then it became a sort of bit of a buzzword. And then various people like Sorrell started putting brand equity valuations into their balance sheet. And the Institute was sort of highly worried about this and went to Andrew saying, can London Business School do an evaluation of this? I mean, if the arguments in favour are sufficiently valid, then we'll go along with it. It obviously raises all sorts of problems. And so we did this in 1989. It's cross-disciplinary because Chris and Andrew are in accounting. Paul is finance professor, and I was in marketing. And it's fairly unusual to have these sort of cross-disciplinary projects. It had a very big impact. We basically said there is simply too much subjectivity in these brand valuations to justify going in the balance sheet, although it partly depends on what you think the balance sheet is for, which turns out to be something the accountants can't quite agree about. Now, I have the sort of, obviously, the marketing perspective on accountants. How can you tell if an accountant is an extrovert? He looks at your shoes in the conversation, not his own shoes. So I'm totally biased on this whole subject, but they get surprisingly worked up when you ask them, by the way, what is the purpose of the balance sheet? Because no one grown up thinks the balance sheet is an accurate representation of the value of the business. Everybody knows it's not. So, rules are followed, and actually the interpretation is different in different countries. So the Japanese and Germans have very, very strict. It's only about past transactions, nothing to do with economic value. The Anglo-Saxon markets, a little bit closer to sort of economic value, but there's lots of subjectivity. Anyhow, basically brand values in the balance sheet were sort of stopped in their tracks by that report, which came out in 1989. So that was another impact. But it also, I think, by looking at these sort of conceptual issues, that got mixed up with the fact that, here we are all these years later, there are three main organisations that do brand valuation. All three are still in London. So that's a sort of London expertise, and some of us still get involved in things like some of my expert witness work is to do in legal cases, is to do with company A did something which then damaged company B's brand, and how bad was the damage. I don't actually do the valuation. What I do is say rude things about the other people's experts' valuation, which is much, much more fun than actually putting my head above the parapet. Thank you very much. So what do I do now? What do emeritus professors do now? Emeritus professor is the most wonderful title. It's very impressive. Very few people know what it means. There's this Rupert Murdoch story. Rupert goes into the editor of the Sunday Times. And Rupert, remember, studied at Oxford. And to do that, he had to have O-level Latin. My hunch is the damage was done at Oxford. I think he was mocked for his colonial accent. And, we're still paying the price of those people who teased Rupert for coming from the colonies and so on. He hates the, British middle class and so on. But anyhow, the story is, he goes and says, we're going to make you emeritus editor. It's from the Latin. A means you're out. Emeritus means you deserve to be out. That's not, okay? Emeritus actually means meritless. So, there's a few of us. I haven't had a salary since 2006. I have a bit of a shared office, but I occupy so much of it, no one else gets in, sort of thing. So that works okay. I get some secretarial support, and I get the affiliation, which is just great. I think it would be fair to say the euphemism is it's a portfolio existence. Okay, for portfolio, possibly read mess. I'm not very good at saying no. If something sounds interesting, I tend to end up doing it. So it's a little bit all over the place. This is the Oxford one, and I'm drawing your attention to it. There are so far 2 reports which have come out. Pickard is a media economist who's the director of research at the Reuters Institute. The first one is, I think, not very controversial, but it's sort of summarizing the economics of broadcasting, but also they don't actually change that much in a digital world. We timed this to be 1 month before analog switch off. Remember the switch over to pure digital TV in the UK. This one is a bit more controversial because it's effectively taking on what is usually an implicit argument, which is the BBC is much too big and powerful, and it's also a public sector organisation, therefore by definition inefficient. And something you will see depending on the outcome next May is there are serious moves to cut the licence fee, which is 40 pence a day, by the way, and cut it by £50 a year. Okay, so cut it down from 40 pence to 25 pence a day and sort of shrink it back into shape, because by definition the market would then expand, and because the market is private sector, it would be better value for money. And we have modelled that, and the short answer is, oh no, it wouldn't. We look at the extreme case of supposing there were no BBC, and basically, the short summary is that you'd either have to pay much more for roughly as good television, or you'd pay roughly the same for much less good television. Okay, and virtually everyone would be worse off. And that's despite all the stories you see in the newspapers, and a lot of newspapers hate the BBC, all the stories in the newspapers about how inefficient the BBC is and this, that, and the other. Look at the numbers. So you can download this. If this is of interest to you, then you can download it. If you Google RISJ Oxford, Reuters Institute for the Study of Journalism, RISJ Oxford, and then you go on publications. And they do their publications in reverse chronological order, and this one was February this year. So this is something I'm not currently working on. I will be working on again. There's a select committee which is looking at the future of the BBC. I presented to them. I'm now waiting for them to report, and we'll probably do a report coming out of that. Second sort of big project is which we had our AGM a couple of weeks ago. This morning, I had a 2-hour conversation. One of my 2 deputy chairs has resigned, which is not a good thing. That's about a day a week. It's pro bono. Probably 90% of what I work on is pro bono. And I recommend being my age, okay? So if you're not short of money and you're in a happy relationship and your health stands up, it's a very, very good time of life, because you kind of work on what you find interesting, and you sort of avoid people you have to be polite to, in the lift, largely. So I get immense satisfaction out of which, by the way, this is the second biggest consumer organization in the world now. Okay, this is 100 million turnover. It's a charity which is entirely funded by commercial activities, and it's mainly a magazine and online publisher, which doesn't take advertising. And its revenue and profits have increased year on year, every year for the last 9 years, which is not usual in print media. Okay, so we've still got lots of work to do, but it's a very, very exciting place to be working. And I was going to stand down at the end of this year. They're now persuading me to do 1 more year because the person who was going to take over isn't going to. But that's about a day a week. We've membership organizations, and I had the same, there's a much smaller organization called the Society of Authors. The problem with membership organizations is a small percentage of very angry old men who don't like the way things are and are always convinced they speak for the silent majority and are very, very persistent and a bit idée fixe, especially if they have a lot of time on their hands. And we've had a bit of a bellyful of one particular, he's fortunately quite stupid, but this leads to a great deal of time wasting. And this is the other project, other big project I'm working on. There's a few others. Leading Marketing, which is a book. I'm the 25% author, and Thomas, who's an alum, is the 75% author, and he's a very, very good collaborator for someone like me because he is an ex-McKinsey partner and German. So he's hugely focused and organized, and that's good for me because I am less focused and considerably less organized. But it's kind of working well. I thought you might be interested by that. In this book, we're using something which I think will happen more in the future. There's a fictional element. Okay, one of the sort of new concepts in marketing is storytelling. And, storytelling goes back, before writing. And so about a third of this book is about a woman called Claudia who gets promoted to chief marketing officer. And she's got, some problems at home, et cetera, et cetera. And I think it's a very good way of sort of introducing and illustrating the ideas. I talked to the Society of Authors. We actually need, neither of us has, written a novel or anything. We need someone who has. And they put me onto Kelly. And you can imagine when I sort of clicked on her website, it's a bit pink, isn't it? I should say my co-author is gay, but I don't think that was the reason. She writes for young girls, sort of 9-year-old girls, very successfully. She's very good at marketing her books. And basically, if you can write for 9-year-old girls and keep their attention, you have the skills to reach sort of marketing managers. I'm not saying it's equivalent, but it's okay. So, and she's been really, really good. And so one of the things I want to sort of raise as another sort of project, which may or may not happen, is, there aren't actually any good novels about business. The sort of Dallas Dynasty kind of thing, which is there's big shoulders and, all that. And then, people who write novels, insofar as they've worked for businesses, they've had a horrible experience, at the front line. And so they write extremely hostile. And, the fact that business and management are interesting and difficult and all about people hasn't been captured. So it seems to me this should be possible. So I'm not going to do it because I haven't got the skills. But, on my to-do list is can we get, McKinsey to sponsor, books about business and management, which are genuine fiction. They have to be page turners. Well, that's all about me. This is the punchline slide. Do visit the micro site and follow and engage on social media. And I've gone a bit longer than I planned. You won't be wholly surprised by that, will you? Any questions? We have a few minutes for questions, and I'm certainly happy to stay on beyond past if you have questions. So, questions? Yes?
So, when you came back in 1976 as a faculty member, what brought you back, and what has kept you here for so long?
Oh, I just loved it. I mean, it's I'd worked for IBM, and in fact, while I was here, you can't do this anymore. I was on a full IBM salary, and then didn't go back to them. So I had a sort of scholarship from IBM with no strings attached, and I was living in A wing with someone to make my bed, okay, and sort of meals in house and a student. I mean, my life has gone downhill since then, but it was, so I fell in love with it as a student, and I just thought this is really, really interesting. I was intrigued. We had two fairly eccentric professors of marketing with grey hair who really hated each other, and I thought, these are interesting. So I mean, my best marks were in things like finance and so on, which are, to me, more straightforward. Marketing, I thought, this is interesting because you can't actually crack it in a linear way. So I was quite intrigued by that. And I got on well with both Simmons and Arenberg. And then I worked for a couple of smaller companies, the second of which was a sort of startup, which, not because of me, I assure you, but actually went into receivership 2 weeks after I arrived, maybe 4 weeks after I arrived. And so my task as marketing manager was to sell the company. It was slightly unusual, very good training. So we did find someone to take it over, but I wasn't sort of that happy in what I was doing. And the school came after me. We would never hire anyone like me now. No PhD, no teaching experience, no research experience. Okay, but so I wouldn't hire me now. We couldn't afford to, but couldn't afford it because of the reputational damage, in the market. But that's what brought me here. And as I say, it's not been a relaxing place to work. But what the hell? I mean, it's a really interesting place to work. It's a really interesting place to work, and there are always new things coming along to work on. I mean, what's not to like? Sure.
Paddy, a question linked to that requirement to have PhD research background as faculty. I talked to a few MBA students around what they think about faculty, and I guess one of the more common subjects around marketing faculty in particular is in a lot of ways that well equipped to teach the latest developments, so digital marketing is an often quoted example. Yes. Just an open question to you, sort of how fair do you think that criticism is? Well, I think how much does it matter?
I think I think it does matter, and I think it's a generic problem that academia moves very slowly. Marketing partly moves quickly, although quite a lot of what moves quickly in marketing is nonsense. Okay, so marketing people tend to think last Wednesday is ancient history, and that's one reason for things like Simply Better is the basic principles of marketing are the same, and human needs are not that different from the Old Testament and Homer kind of thing, but it's that's not what people think. So I think generically marketing academics are not that well equipped to deal with the very fast changing things. As it happens, I think we happen in the marketing faculty here not to have anyone who's very strong on digital marketing. I sort of keep reasonably up to date, but I'm not teaching. So I think it's a fair criticism, but it would be, I think, a criticism at most schools. Okay, and also insofar as people are teaching about it, quite a lot of what they teach will be nonsense as well. So, okay. Other questions? Yes.
Paddy, you mentioned when talking about yourself and Tim Ambler and other illustrious authors that the impact in the academic world of citation.
Yes.
People who read your article and cited and so forth. And you showed how influential that is, but you also looked at what influences directly. And I just wondered if you had any view on this emerging metric called altmetrics, which tries to look at the impact of publication or research output, whatever you want to call it, in the internet sphere, in the blogger sphere, and so forth.
Well, I'm not up to speed on that. There is a slightly related thing to do with sort of practitioner impact, in that one thing which we recommend in the paper I mentioned, which Julian Birkinshaw and I have done with a doctoral student, is that there would be some value in measuring citations in those practitioner publications that do citations. Like MIT Sloan Management Review does include some citations. And given that the people who fund research, particularly governments funding research, are now increasingly looking for real-world impact, that actually would be quite a useful metric. It's a limited metric because things like, Harvard Business Review doesn't include citations. So it would be limited to those practitioner publications that did, but it would actually give you numbers. And of course, there are a lot of web metrics, and I'm not up to speed on those. But the web certainly lends itself to big data analysis. So this could be done on a very, very large scale, as long as you agree the ground rules. And the ground rules are actually quite contentious. Other questions? Any questions on this side? Yes?
You mentioned rankings a couple of times in your presentation, and we often hear Andrew say at the school meeting that rankings don't drive our strategy but are useful. I just wondered what your view was.
Well, they don't drive our strategy, and of course we complain about the rankings, but of course they're hugely important, yes. And they are trusted third parties, at which we don't have that. Okay, so if we're saying at which, and one of the things I've said as chairman is, the aim is to be world class in everything we do. And when I said that, one of the sort of cheeky 20-somethings said, "How would we know?" Which is a very good question. And so you actually do know. In our case, we really know, because if Business Week and the FT and so on are saying it, it's sort of true. Having said that, they are subjective. I think that it again comes back to the simply better argument that there are the particular metrics they use, and some of those might influence you sort of at the margin. It so happens we do quite well in the FT because the FT, one of the FT's criteria is international. And, we do well on that. If you're in Switzerland, like IMD, you do even better because, the percentage of faculty from Switzerland is very, very small. But one of the reasons we want more female faculty is it's going to help us in the FT rankings. So it doesn't drive the strategy. The strategy is to deliver the mission as well as you can using, we are, you will have heard the expression punching above our weight. We clearly have fewer resources than the big US schools. Do I sound bitter? I mean, Harvard Business School is twice as old as us, twice as big as us. Par for the course would therefore be ×4. When the banking crunch came, they got into a panic and fired a lot of back office staff because their endowment went down from $2.8 to $2.3 billion. Well, thank you very much, Harvard Business School. I think we'd be quite happy with a quarter of $2.3 billion as our endowment. So, there is only one issue for London Business School, and that is we're competing against the major league, and they have far more resources than us. So we have to be cleverer. And that's about the core delivery of teaching and research better than the competition. So in that sense, I agree with Andrew. And we then say, what are the ways we can do that maybe other people can't do so well? But it's certainly not the case, and I'm sure Andrew wasn't suggesting we take no notice of the rankings. So we certainly do. And of course, we use the rankings in our publicity all the time because we look very good. One more question? Yes, final question. And I'm happy to take one-on-one questions after that.
Yes.
This is sort of coupled up in the 50th, but also essentials of marketing, I suppose. So if we think back to that first photo where there was one woman,
yes.
Think about where we are now.
You spotted her?
Yes.
Yes.
Think about where we are now and
yes.
where we're headed. So 50 years from now, if we think, if there's an increasing parity in society, let's hope.
Yes.
Do you think that, what effect will that have on any of the essentials of marketing that you mentioned, do you think, if any?
I don't think it changes marketing, because I think marketing is about people. And one of the issues you're always dealing with in marketing is people vary. You have segmentation and all of that. I mean, certainly my expectation is the percentage of faculty, the percentage of students who are female, I would hope is on a long-term positive trend. It's quite a slow trend, I have to say. I don't think it changes anything fundamentally. I think that I somewhat subscribe to not the men are from Mars, women are from Venus, but more what I think is a much more intelligent book called Why Men Don't Listen and Women Can't Read Maps, which is written by an Australian married couple. I will give you as a takeaway sort of my favourite example they give. It's a made-up example. Is of the man you're driving on the motorway and your wife says, "Would you like a coffee?" All right, now to sort of anyone female, it is quite obvious she means, "I would like a coffee. Will you please stop at the next opportunity?" Okay. The male response to that is a slightly strange question, but do I know? So I think there are differences which overlap, I think that then would. I could imagine, boardrooms which are 50-50 might have a somewhat different feel. I think when you've got sort of the solo woman, then, that doesn't really change very much, including she might feel she has to be very macho in her own behavior kind of thing. I think once you start getting genuine parity right at the top of organizations, I think that does change the feel of it a bit. Having said that, I mean, our perception of ourselves as an institution, I think, is that we are relatively gender blind. The women here may disagree with that, okay? Because it's kind of easy for me to say, and I've not been in the top management for quite a few years. So I think the trend will continue. I don't think it changes anything much in marketing. There are a lot of women in marketing, and there are a lot of senior women in marketing, and that really is increasing all the time. But I think the nature of marketing actually fundamentally doesn't change at all. I think it's getting more difficult than ever before because many of the old ways of doing marketing are still there, and you've got all the new ways as well. And then occasionally some of the old ways disappear. I think we will see, for anything on a large scale, any significant brand, you'll be using less direct mail because you'll be using email sort of entirely for that purpose, which is much more effective. I'm astonished it's taken so long. We've just this year, more than 50% of classified advertising revenue is online. I thought that would happen much, much sooner. So some of the old things go away, like print classifieds, at least for big brands. But TV advertising is just as big as it's ever been, et cetera, et cetera. And you've got big data and all mobile and social and all of that as well. So you've got marketing budgets which are not increasing as a percentage of revenue, but you've got far more things to spend them on. And so the challenge of how do you use them so the whole is more than the sum of the parts, and the brand comes across as one brand, not really difficult. So marketing is always going to be interesting. It's about people. Thank you for your attention.